I know, it's all good. Story of my life. uh, gives me more time to get my act together. Okay, the greeting's over. Sit down, for Pete's sake. Okay, this is like a good day. I got 5 people in the front row. This is sweet. 6. Nothing against people in the back row. It's all good. I get it. Yeah, overachievers. Okay, so I'm just going to start this morning by saying welcome to Willow Spring. Love, as Eduardo said and Sam said, we just love this church. And I'm so thankful to fellowship with all of you. I hope you're excited as I am. If you have children especially, that summer's on. Right? Good news. Speaking of kids, so Colin, who is kind of right in the middle now. How old is he now? Just turned 21. Yeah. He one time, and this is just kind of how we are, but I remember he was a teenager and I was walking with him. We were just having a really cool father-son time. And all of a sudden he just looked at me. He just kind of goes like this at me and he goes, Dad, 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 Dad. And he looks at my shoulder. Yeah. And I'm like, what is it? He goes, dude, I don't know what's on your shoulder, but get it off. And I looked, and there's huge green spider was on my shoulder. And I literally jumped. I screamed like a little girl. A. B, I jumped 5 feet in the air. I'm just like, ah. And then Colin just starts going, ah, and it was a plastic spider he had stuck on my shoulder. You know that verse that says, don't spare the rod on your child? No. But what Colin didn't know, because I had never told him this story, it was totally payback. Yeah, God has a way of, in fact, we're going to talk about that today. But anyway, when I was a little kid, do you remember at Halloween, those little black widows, the little plastic, you all see them come out at Halloween on a ring or whatever. They were really popular when I was a little kid too, and they looked straight up real. And I thought it'd be super funny to put that little plastic black widow in my parents' bed inside. Just thought it'd be funny. And we had a great relationship, by the way. It wasn't some, and it was literally, I'd kind of forgotten about it, and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just heard this scream. And I'm like, what is it? And I go into my room, or my parents' room. The covers are, I had put the spider like just in the bed. The covers are pulled back. My dad has a newspaper like this. And my mom's just huddled in a corner. And some of you are looking at me like, you are a weird pastor. So I go over there and I just was like, I'm probably going to die tonight. But I go over and I just picked it up. And I'm just plastic, ha, 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 And I literally, my dad just looked like the spawn of Satan at that. Yeah, I mean, it was bad. It was not funny. Anybody here just curious why God even created spiders, frankly? I mean, I'm sure there's a food chain thing going on. But I just don't understand spiders. And if he did it to put the fear of himself in us, it works. But on a serious note, we tend to underestimate the impact, and this is what I want to talk about today, of small things. The poisonous venom of a spider, no larger than, frankly, an eraser on a pencil, has killed thousands of men and women. The atom bomb, small object, yet it brought the nation of Japan to surrender in just a few months. A flea. Lori, we're not going to talk about fleas, are we? Because we have a little, well, yeah, we are, I guess. I just did. We have a little dog who brought some fleas into our home, and that doesn't work for Lori. So the pest guys were out, the flea busters this week. But a flea bite, a very small flea, and his little bite has the ability to kill a 100-pound dog. It's true. A termite, small insect, it can literally destroy a 3-story house if you ignore it. And it doesn't matter the size of a man or a woman, but if you have a little piece of gravel in your shoe, you're basically useless until you get it out. A blood clot, no larger than a BB, can kill a 250-pound dude. It's true. If you ignore that little pain in your heart, you can die of a heart attack. And we all know cancer. A little cell can multiply, it can become fatal. We've been studying the Sermon on the Mount together, and as we learned, there are many attributes that Jesus implored us to develop in our life, right? Through the power of the Holy Spirit, such as, here's one, having a pure heart. But in doing so, church, there's a fundamental principle that we can't forget. We're going to talk about Solomon today. And he's our main character, and he actually warns of the little foxes in Song of Songs 2:15. He says, "Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines." And so in 1 Kings 11:14-17, we're going to look at that today. We're going to see the principle of small things. Can you say that with me? Small things. Let's put up that first slide. Oh, nobody's back there, so I'll do it. Yeah, the small stuff. And listen, church, if we ignore the little things that Satan throws at us, or this is sort of a good, bad sermon today. So we ignore the things that Satan throws at us, or we abide by the ones that God has actually called us to, the small things, they may grow up to be big things. Very important. So for better or worse, our treatment of those may even affect, listen, parents, those who follow after us long after we're gone. How we treat the small things. You guys have your Bibles in front of you in those chairs. By the way, if you don't have your own Bible, please write your name in it. Take it home. We'll put another one in its place. Take 10. You can give them to your friends. We don't care. We love to get rid of Bibles. But I'll also show the text up here this morning. We're in 1 Kings chapter 11, 14-17. And here's what it says. It says, "And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad, the Edomite. He was of the royal house of Edom. For when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel remained there for 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. But Hadad fled to Egypt, together with certain Edomites of the father's servants, Hadad still being a little child." So let me give you some historical context, a foundation for this. So here's Joab. Joab is David's military leader, and he was a great leader. And he was very loyal to David. And he was very efficient at his job. Nothing or no one would escape Joab. He was sort of like General Maximus of the Roman army. Someone said Joab is sort of the John Wayne of the Bible. He's a bad dude. However, in this particular story, interestingly, Joab misses one. He misses one. He makes a tactical error. And listen, church, that little mistake of missing a small one came back to haunt not David, who he's the commander for. It actually came back to haunt David's son, Solomon. That's interesting. See, Joab and David, they're in Edom. He had slain all the males in Edom. But prematurely, Joab is now focused on burying his own dead, and this little child named Hadad of the royal descent escaped from Edom with some other people. They went to Egypt, where this little guy was raised by Pharaoh, who took a liking to him. And now by the time David's son, the mighty King Solomon, he's well into his reign as the king of Israel, Hadad grows up. He's full grown, and he says to the Pharaoh one day, "It's payback time. And he heads back to his homeland, and he becomes an adversary of Israel during, frankly, all of Solomon's reign. That's interesting. In fact, it's said of this guy Hadad that he abhorred Israel. Serious hate going on. And so now Solomon has to deal with that small thing that Joab let get away. So, interesting story. What is the lesson for us today? There's always several lessons, but here's what I'm taking from it. That we need to sweat the small stuff. We need to sweat the small things in this life. Okay? Can you turn to your neighbor right now and just say, sweat the small stuff? But say it nicely. It's nothing about them. The small things. Let me ask you, church, are we paying attention to the failures in our life, the things we're missing of small nature, and our faithfulness to the small things that God has actually asked us to do? Because if we're failing to dot every I, to cross every T, and we're not thinking much about it, God has a lot to say about small things. Anybody like me notice that the days go by quickly? This life cooks. In fact, I tell my kids that are older, it's just a precious time in my life with my 20-something-year-olds that, guys, life's going to fly. Before you know it, 5-10 years are going to be gone. What are you doing with the small things that God's called you to do and to not do? In fact, it's our consideration to the little things that God actually examines, that he really cares about. Because neglecting them can actually ruin us. Did you know that? Interesting. And conversely, faithfulness to small things enables God. I believe this. Now, God can do anything. I get it. But it's almost like our faithfulness to small things now gives him license to trust us to do big things. That's huge. In us and through us. In other words, faithfulness to small things can be our greatest asset, but neglecting small things can lead to our demise. That's pretty deep. So point number one, small compromise, listen church, leads to what? Big compromise. It's true. See, accepting the little misdemeanors today will cause us to accept full-grown sin tomorrow. Little misdemeanors today can very possibly turn into full-grown sin tomorrow. In the 1960s? Anybody here alive in the 60s? Nah, none of you were alive in the 60s. There was this little thing called the hippie movement. Started with this small... John's like, Woodstock! Jimi Hendrix! Yeah, okay. All right. Anyway, started with this notion called free love. Literally, it's called the free love philosophy. Our society, founded on Christian principles, neglected them. I think it kind of was like we didn't see it coming. And this free love movement, it rapidly progressed, and now it's all grown up. Look around. We see the offspring of that which was sown 50 years ago. Really. And it didn't look nearly as big as it does now. It was really interesting. I just decided yesterday I wanted to buy some new stuff to listen to. I couldn't believe, I go on iTunes to the store and I'm looking through all the current albums. Man, like the top 10 albums are all explicit now. You know what I mean? I love music. And I like all kinds of music, but it just bummed me out that, I'm not going to buy records where it's like every other song has an E next to it, which means explicit. It's got profanity in it. Or it's just too doggone dirty. I thought, that is a drag. What is going on in our society that to sell records, we now have to use, gutter language? But I think our country was asleep. And so now our society is filled with sexual immorality, moving at light speed. And frankly, sexual immorality is just one of the many areas where we can be reduced to rubble as humans. And it starts with just a little virus, you know? And sometimes we laugh at the cute little disobedience of a child. Our children never disobeyed, but perhaps yours did. And then we weep when they grow up and commit more serious sins against the Lord. See, if you let the little things go by without any effort to resist them, then Satan is going to, I assure you, bring out the big guns. He's coming after you, and he's going to blow you out of the water. He knows our weaknesses. Satan's not going to tempt you to rob a bank, but he will attempt to get you to cheat on a test at school, young people. You know, just a little minor sin. Maybe fudge on your time card at work. I don't know. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I think it's true that our big sins are often a result of little compromises that led up to it. When you hear a preacher, it's always so sad. And pray for me as your pastor. Pray for all the pastors and all the leaders of this church. You hear about these celebrities or pastors, and they go down in flames. Almost without fail. It wasn't because they just fell into a temptation for the first time. No, they actually dabbled in it. And then they went down. See, the evil one knows the key to our destruction is getting us to become accustomed to the little foxes. Right? Without questioning whether they're right, they're wrong. And before long, we might do something that we're going to regret for the rest of our life. Now hang in there, guys. I know this is heavy, but it's true, isn't it? It's true. Be encouraged. Really, just be encouraged as I continue. I want to give you the case in point, though. I want to back up a little bit from that text. And I want to look at this compromise process that actually led to Solomon's demise. See, there was no king like King Solomon. And he's said to be beloved of God. Yet outlandish women caused him to sin, or his choice to dabble in that. That's where his demise begins. His mother had particularly cautioned him against it, in fact. In Proverbs 31:3, it says, "Give not strength unto women," perhaps alluding to Samson, who lost his strength. Remember Samson? Lost his strength because he gave information to a conniving woman. So let me just say this for 1 minute. Girl power. You girls rule. Yeah. You have power to do a lot of good and a lot of not. His own father, David, his fall began, you know this, with the lust of the flesh, didn't it? And it should have alerted him. Solomon took many women, so many that they amounted to 700 wives. Man, that gives me a headache to think about. I mean, that's nothing against you. I love you so much, but I just want to love one wife. And 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women to try to keep. And not one of them was good or virtuous. Wow. Which he later writes. God had particularly, by the way, forbidden the kings to multiple wives. David had multiple wives and perhaps made Solomon presume then that it was lawful for him. Dad, these are strange women, Moabites, Ammonites, etc., of all these nations which God had specifically forbidden them to intermarry with. Do not marry these women. And frankly, he probably did this, Solomon probably did this, because the daughters of Israel were too modest for him. These foreign women pleased him with their looseness, shamelessness of their dress, their air, their conversation. And it says that Solomon clave unto these in love. And he was extravagantly fond of them. And listen, now he was drawn by them to the worship of strange gods. This is the grave consequence of these wives. We have reason to think that it actually impaired his health. He aged faster. It exhausted his treasure, which, does anybody know that Solomon had a little bit of cash? Probably the richest man to ever live in history. And though it was vast indeed, it wouldn't be enough to maintain the pride and vanity of all of these women. In latter years, it actually caused him to neglect his business endeavors. He lost his supplies from abroad. He was forced, in keeping up all of his grandeur, to burden his subject with heavy taxes, which they just loved. But listen, none of those consequences were so bad as this. It says that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. Wow. He grew cool, indifferent in his own religion, remiss in the service of the God of Israel. Remember the one who said he was beloved? He grew less frequent, less serious in his ascent to the house of the Lord. And he left his first love and turned from following God. One author wrote this. I thought this was compelling. It says, "Never was gallant ship so wrecked. Never was crown so profaned," in reference to Solomon's fall. So it's a lesson for us that such a powerful as Solomon, who's famed for his, you remember what he asked for? Wisdom. Brilliant. So God gave him wisdom. But he allowed himself through a series, church, of compromise to be made such a fool of. Wow. And so don't ever presume upon the strength of your convictions to be secure and off your guard today. I'll never forget, I was walking with my dad. I was probably in my teens, like you guys, in my teens, and my dad would have been around my age now, actually, 28. So anyway, we're walking in the mall. Never forget it. Hey, Dad, da-da-da-da-da. Boom. Really good-looking girl, kind of scantily clad, walking towards us. I'm with my dad. I'm a teen boy, and so it's just kind of this awkward moment. She's really hot, walking by. She walks by, and I'm just like, I'm not saying anything. My dad says this. He says, "Son, temptation never goes away. Always be on your guard." I'm like, okay. Don't ever presume that you can get off your guard, church, with the little things. And here's the next point. Failure to pay attention to the small things can affect those who go after us. Wow. See, Solomon didn't know about Hadad. Remember Hadad in our story, lurking in the background? And certainly David didn't know that Hadad would someday be the worst adversary of his own son, of his own beloved nation. And you and I may never see the adversary that we let escape or the sin that we ignore. But our children might, or their children might. And perhaps generations down the road, it will inflict even our kids. Listen to this. Matthew Henry, commentator, he writes this. "If those that are in reputation for religion in anything set a bad example, they know not what a deal of mischief that they may do by it, particularly to their own children." He says, "One bad act of a good man may be of more pernicious consequence to others than 20 wicked men." Did you hear that? One supposedly godly man does one major compromise. It's worse potentially than 20 wicked guys. That's powerful. Frankly, guys, I would rather just, the Bible says what from temptation? It says just walk away. It says flee. F-L-E-E, flee. From temptation. Man, I want to run from evil. I don't want to hang around for it to consume me. So important. All right, new thought. Sometimes we question why we may not be experiencing God doing something big or significant in our life. Maybe you. It's like, God, what? I really want to be used of you. Why aren't you doing big things or significant things through my life? And let me just say this for the record. And perhaps I've even fallen to this where I've needed to regroup. Maybe we have not passed the test of handling the little things correctly. There's one seasoned pastor. I just laugh because I have these conversations now. One seasoned pastor told a young preacher who was industrious, ready to do ministry. He wanted to pastor a church immediately of 1,000 people. And the pastor said to him, listen, you've got to learn to be faithful with a church of 25 first. You've got to be faithful with what you've been given first. Profound. Be dependable with little is what the pastor said. You know, there's a parable in Luke 16. Jesus said, whoever can be trusted with little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. I remember going through the drive-thru, again, with one of my kids, I think it was Christopher, going through the drive-thru at Taco Bell, which I never do. I never go to fast food, but I did this one time. I'm kidding. I did this one time, and I go in there, and they give me $5 too much change. $5. There's a long line. It's like, really, Taco Bell cares about $5? And I remember, and Christopher didn't say, hey, Dad, keep it, go, go, go. But it was a good lesson because I said, Christopher, it's so easy to rationalize with something this little, this stupid $5 bill. And I could just drive off. Everybody does it. And I said, really? I'm going to sell my integrity for $5? And so I just didn't. I gave it back. I do this, parents, do that with your kids. If it's something small, just know that if you don't handle it correctly, you're selling their integrity for that stupid thing or your own. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with very much. God requires faithfulness in the small things before he can trust us with the larger ones. Yesterday, swim season is back. Every child in this town swims, or they dance, or they do both in our case. So swim season's back, and of course, we have our jobs as parents. Every parent has to sign up for all your jobs. Well, yesterday I go to my first swim meet, which, by the way, is a major investment. It's really cool, but there's like thousands of kids, and so I'm like, oh, what's my job going to be today? Am I going to flip burgers or what? No, this was my job. Both of us, actually. And, they are so organized. These swim meets are so organized. I mean, it's like going to the Olympics. And it's incredible how efficient it is, right? I mean, and you got, I don't know, how many lanes are there in a pool? 8? Yeah, 8 lanes. And I mean, it's just, 8 kids. Kids jump in, do their thing. Man, boom, next time, 8 more kids. They jump in, do their thing. I mean, it's incredible. It's just all day. So what they do, literally hundreds of kids, doing either relays or their little things. So, and all ages, little ones all the way up to real large ones. And so my job was I assembled ribbons. Okay, first through 8th place ribbons. Okay, there's boxes of ribbons. I'm like, oh, what have I done? I'm standing here. What am I going to do? So my job for the Moraga Ranch Swim Club in particular was to. So after every half hour or so, some lady, the runner, she comes with stacks of pages with the labels of all the winners of the ones that just swam in the last half hour. I mean, it's incredible. She runs over, gives us the sheets, So there's 3 of us, and so I get my 3 sheets. And what I do is I just go through little stickers like, by the way, are you all wearing name tags? No, you're not. I am. I told you these name tags are really a way of just leveling the playing field, especially for visitors. If I'm going to wear mine, you told me you were going to wear yours. He who is faithful in the small things. Okay. Anyway, these stickers were like half that size, okay? And each sheet has what? 36 stickers? Okay, so my job is to go through each one, peel it off. Oh, this one's 8th place. It's Moraga Ranch Swim Club, so I get the 8th place sticker, put that on there. I did hundreds of ribbons. And I remember thinking there, while I'm doing this, I felt, first of all, I thought this is really laborious. I mean, really, are these ribbons that important? And then, by the way, I get my stack, and now that we've assembled them all, this half hour, I take all my Moraga Ranch ones, and I have to now go to all the kids and then put the ribbons in the right folder. Yeah, it was pretty, interesting. So, anyway, I found myself thinking, this is really laborious. I mean, really, does this matter? I mean, how important is this? And all of a sudden, I thought about what I was going to talk about today. It was like perfect. In fact, I've been praying, God, give me a good illustration, at least in my own heart, that works about why do small things matter? And all of a sudden, guess what? I started looking for Caden and Ellie's name. Man, when's Caden and Ellie's name going to? Why would I care about that? Because I knew it would matter to Caden and Ellie. And then last night, I'm tucking Ellie in, and clueless me, I've never seen this. I look up in her bed, and she has all kinds of stuff everywhere in her bed, but I look up, and all her ribbons are hanging there from last year. And I said, what are those? And she goes, those are my ribbons from last year. You know, the ones I won. I was like, oh, those ribbons matter to the one. Matters to her. Little thing. God cares about how we handle the small things. Can I give you some famous quotes? Napoleon Hill, he said, if you can't do great things, do small things in a great way. Booker T. Washington, he said, success in life is founded upon attention to the small things rather than the large things, to the everyday things nearest to us rather than the things that are remote and uncommon. Vincent van Gogh, great things, this is so good, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Mother Teresa, heard of her? Boy, talk about being faithful with the little things. She says, be faithful in small things because it is in them that your strength lies. Man, that's good. Okay, so I want to give you a little traction today. Because you might be thinking to yourself, okay, what small things am I blowing it in that I need to fix? And what small things is God calling me to do that I'm not being faithful in? And maybe they're one and the same, frankly. But let's talk about, I'm just going to go through a list of areas where God clearly talks about us being obedient. One is parenting. Okay, those of you who are parents. Solomon's advice to us says this, train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not turn from it. That's good. So, are you being faithful in training up your children day by day in the little things, maybe doing devotions with them, making sure that you're modeling Christ in your own home? How about marriages or just relationships? You know, the Bible says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Are you doing the simple things? Loving your wife? Loving your husband? How about in your career? Whatever you do, this is Colossians 3:23. Think about your job right now. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Boy, if you want a little thing to do, just do a good job at whatever you do. Even if you hate your job right now, you know what? Just go in tomorrow and say, you know what? I'm doing this as unto the Lord, and I'm going to do it well because I'm a representative of God. And it could just happen to change your attitude. Relationships outside of the church. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. I've told you, I've had some conversations with you. One of my goals for myself this year was to be more intentional in my conversations with those outside of this church, to try to get into a spiritual dialogue, because time is of the essence. Amen? Are you faithful with those little conversations that God maybe gave you just yesterday where you could have gone deeper? Relationships here in our church at Willow. Psalm 133, how good and pleasant it is when we dwell together in unity. A little thing for you might be not gossiping about someone. Or a little thing for you might be actually encouraging someone. I don't know. Just giving you stuff to sort of let filter through. Giving. Yeah, money. You know, the Bible talks a ton about money. We are not a church about collecting money and hoarding money. We are a church that just wants all of us, Lori and I included, to be obedient in this area that God calls us to do, and that's to give to the storehouse so that we can do ministry. And, you know, if you're one of those people and you're maybe thinking, why isn't God seemingly faithful in this area in my life? Well, in finances. And trust me, I'm not teaching you a, prosperity gospel at all here. All I'm saying is it really reasonable to go to God? God gives us something to obey him in. Is it reasonable for them to go to God and say, hey, you're not blessing me in this area, when we're not doing that very thing that God asks us to obey him in? It's like we're tying his hands behind his back. So in the area of giving, he who is faithful with the small thing will be trusted with more. Okay? And then our relationship with God, and this is probably the biggest. I know it's a big thing, but it's also a small thing how we conduct our daily life in nurturing intimacy. Luke 10:27 says this, love the Lord your God with what? All your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all of your mind. Are you making your relationship with Christ day by day in the little things your first priority? Am I? Good questions. So what is the one personally, I want you to walk out of here today with what is the one small thing that I want to make sure I get right? So it doesn't either turn into a major act of demise, or the small thing that, man, if I do this, God can trust me with more. What is it? What is the one thing today? And let me leave you with this today. Some of the greatest men and women of God were considered to be small or little in their own sight. So God uses actually the small to do big things. He uses the small to do big things. Gideon certainly looked at himself as being undersized, I'm sure, unworthy of being used by God to deliver the children of Israel. How about the little stones? See the graphic there? In David's hand, can you imagine? The little stone in his sling had no potential, but when it was placed in the pocket of that sling, out of obedience to God, love that story, it became a rather potent weapon, didn't it? And brought down the giant Goliath. How about the Apostle Paul? You read about his description. He was a small, yet, a small man. No other biblical character, though, besides Christ has had the influence on the world that Paul had. Really. He was from the smallest tribe of Israel, Benjamin, yet he stood before prison wardens, Paul did, kings, governors, executioners, and he obediently shared the most powerful message ever given to man, and that was the gospel. Listen, God tends to do big things through those who are faithful with the small things in this life. I believe that. And by the way, what is big in the eyes of God is very different often than what is big in the eyes of man. What really matters. See, you don't have to be the most educated person in the world to be used of God. I hear people say that sometimes. They're like, the reason why they're terrified to share their faith is they don't know enough. And I always say to them, I don't either. I just got to trust God to give me the words at the right time and continue to, with the little things, to acquire more and more knowledge about him. You're never going to be ready to share the gospel. Just share your story. Trust me, God will give you the words. You don't have to be the best dressed person in the world to be used of God. You don't have to be the best looking person in the world, contrary to popular culture. You don't have to have all the credentials to be used of God. You don't have to be the wealthiest person to be used of God. You only have to be willing. You only have to be willing. In fact, did you know that it's through our inadequacy, church, but our obedient faithfulness in the small things, that God's strength is actually validated? That's where his strength is validated. One last verse. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always what? Obeyed. So now, not only as in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation, which theologically basically means you're saved, but now I want you to transform into my image in this life. It says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And so, as you're working on this small thing, this one small thing, and maybe you need to pray about what that is, that God will show you what it is you need to work on. Please know that it is God working in and through you. You're not on your own trying to make this happen. Pray for God to A, reveal it, and B, to work in and through you in this small thing, whatever it is. Amen? One last small thing we should pray about is the Warriors game. When is that? That's tomorrow night. I think it's going to be the last Warriors game. It better be. Lori, do you have a song that we can close with? Oh, yeah, that's okay. That's right.
But it's everybody.
Yeah, come on up, worship team. And you know what? Let's just say these words that we sing with conviction right now, and that God would reveal to us that which we need to learn today.